want to know what you're fighting for. Podcast for George. 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 Oh, yeah.
Okay. Hello. Hi. How are you? Welcome on into another podcast by George. And thank you, as always, to the PVG singers. Folks, that's Bernie and Sloan from a few years ago doing our introduction there. I really like that. And I'm really going to like today's show, too, because we've got a returnee, somebody that I really like. I mean, I refer to her as a muckraking reporter, an ace reporter, Bleeding Heartland. Everybody knows that's one of my faves. I follow it. I recommend it all the time. We talk about what's going on with Iowa's politicians on the local, state, and federal level. And some people might tune in today and say, well, George, what the hell with what's going on in Gaza? What are you doing talking about Iowa? Well, you know, everything's interwoven and interconnected. That might be it. But tomorrow we're going to have the great Stephen Semler on with Speaking Security. We're going to be talking about Gaza, and you'll want to tune that show in. But in the meantime, I wanted to get Laura on, and I hope that you saw the promo, which, you know, I work on these things, these graphics. I want everybody to see this. Is Trump unstoppable here? And it has to do with the Iowa poll, some new polling here, which shows that Trump is the overwhelming favorite to win Iowa, and not just with Republicans, because, you know, we're a Republican state. So the Democrats aren't going to stop him, but the Republicans have tried to or are trying to. And that's what we're going to be talking about today, again, with the great Laura Belin. Let's put her live line graphic on and do her introduction. Bleeding Heartland is a community blog providing original reporting and commentary about Iowa politics, especially campaigns and elections, state government, social and environmental issues. Bleeding Heartland also covers what the Iowans in Congress are up to and any federal, state, or local policies of interest to Iowa readers. Laura Belin's been the site's primary author and sole editor since way back in 2008. Man, every time I read that, it makes me feel really old. Recognized nationwide as an authority on Iowa politics, the legislature, the judiciary, and, of course, the Iowa governor's office. So we're going to be touching on a lot of those things. But let me take that down, click this button, move this over here, and click there and say good morning to our good friend, Laura Belin. Hi, Laura.
Good morning, George. Good to be here.
Hey, thanks for coming on here. Now, we've got a slate of things that we're going to talk about. One thing that is just this morning, I wanted your opinion on this, because, I mean, you've been studying and looking at these political things on the state and federal level for a long time. I just had Matthew Ho on earlier this week, or about a week or so ago, and he was talking about the fact that the Democrats should have seen the train coming down the track with the speakership deal. They should have either abstained or maybe even voted for McCarthy to keep that nutcake in there, to keep the extreme nutcake from getting in. This Mike Johnson guy, and they should have known that that was coming. They should have seen that that was coming, and they should have stopped that. Okay, so I'm going to ask you about that. But also, I saw today in the news where George Santos, they had an expulsion vote on him from Congress, and they voted to retain him. But 31 Democrats joined with Republicans voting against George Santos's expulsion. Now, my question is, and it kind of goes along with that McCarthy vote and that type of thing. Katie Porter, for instance, voted against the expulsion. She was one of the 31 Democrats that joined with Republicans. Are they doing that because they look at Santos and say, okay, yeah, I mean, this guy ain't right. I mean, there's something wrong with him, obviously, but he's disliked by the Republicans. He's weak. He's ineffective. He's maybe even a little mushuga. Let's keep him in there, because who we might get instead would be worse, more effective than this guy. Okay, so what do you think of all that?
I'll go in order. First of all, I don't agree with the assessment that Democrats should have voted to keep Kevin McCarthy in there. I mean, if Kevin McCarthy had offered them something real, some kind of power sharing or any kind of concession that was meaningful, but basically, I mean, they just had bailed him out and helped keep the government from shutting down. And then he went on the Sunday morning talk shows and tried to blame Democrats for everything instead of his own party. So even though the Democrats had just helped him get the funding bill over the line. So I don't think it's meaningfully different having Mike Johnson there versus Kevin McCarthy. And the one thing I did agree with Matt Gaetz on when he had the motion to vacate the chair is he said, Kevin, one thing that everybody has in common is that Kevin McCarthy's lied to everybody. I mean, his word was worth absolutely nothing. So, and he catered to the extremist faction in the Republican Party most of the time. So I just don't think it's going to be that different. And I think that the Democrats did the right thing on that by sticking with Hakeem Jeffries and not trying to help elect a Republican speaker. There was never, as far as I read from all of the congressional reporters I follow, there was never any meaningful concession on the table to Democrats during that whole period. So as for yesterday's motion, I was interested in that vote on to expel George Santos. And by the way, that was never going to succeed anyway, because you needed a 2/3 vote, and they were not going to ever have a 2/3 vote. But I saw Jamie Raskin was one of the Democrats who voted against, and he did issue a statement on it. I didn't see whether Katie Porter issued a statement, but he said, look, there have only been, I think, 5 or maybe 6 members of Congress who have ever been expelled. 3 of them were because they had participated in trying to dissolve the country during the Civil War, and the other ones had already been criminally convicted. And he said, look, I mean, the allegations against him are very serious, and if he is convicted in a court of law, then that he would view that differently. But I think Jamie Raskin didn't want to set a precedent by saying, we're just going to start expelling people when they're accused of crimes, but they haven't been committed of crimes, because that could end up being used against other people.
Isn't that kind of the argument that they use for the impeachment actions also, that, once you pursue those, once you go down, get that train rolling down the track, whichever party has the opportunity, they're going to respond accordingly, and it just never ends.
Yeah, and I think that we're in that era now with impeachment. I think at this point, I mean, every time we have a president of one party in the House of Representatives controlled by the other party, it's very likely that there's going to be an impeachment on the table. It certainly sounds like the Republican majority in the House is going to press ahead with impeaching Joe Biden next year. I'd be pretty surprised if they don't.
Okay, well, thanks for.
I'm sorry, Santos. The other thing I was going to say is, if he were expelled, it's very likely a Democrat would win the special election. So I don't think that the Democrats who voted against expelling him were thinking like, oh no, somebody even worse could get elected. I mean, that's a seat Democrats really should take back next year in any event.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So why not more than 31? Then why wouldn't all the Democrats want to vote to get
Santos?
I mean,
I think many of them wanted to be, they were on record earlier this year. There was a separate vote to try to expel him. And I think they were already on record saying that for many of them, they think there's enough evidence, even though he hasn't been convicted in a court of law. There's plenty of evidence of wrongdoing. I mean, some people thought that the whole thing yesterday was kabuki theater, because these New York moderate Republicans, I mean, they were the ones leading the charge to expel Santos. They had all just voted for Mike Johnson for speaker, this complete extremist, election denier, for a total ban on abortion, thinks that sodomy should be banned. And some people thought this was going to be cover for them. I mean, these are the 5 who were leading the charge yesterday in the House represent districts Joe Biden carried. In New York, it's looking like they might have pretty difficult reelection bids there. So, maybe from some people felt that this was just an opportunity for them to go on the record, go home and tell their constituents like, hey, I tried taking on my own party to get rid of this guy, George Santos. And then hopefully people won't notice that meanwhile they're supporting Mike Johnson and all of his extremism. So, a lot of times with these congressional votes, it's like difficult to take it at face value, and people may be making a lot of different calculations. Even people on the same side of one vote can have a lot of different reasons for getting there.
I'll encourage everyone to make comments and ask questions. I mean, they know that Laura has the bona fides. We've got people tuning in here already asking questions. Now, here's one, a comment. It's not related to what we're talking about necessarily, but maybe it is. Susan Divine Keeney says, Joni Ernst does nothing for years but stand for pictures. So I guess the question for you, Laura, is when you look at Joni Ernst to date, do you think her legacy is mostly ineffectiveness or the reverse? Well, that indeed she isn't just standing for pictures, she's doing a lot of harm. What do you think?
Well, it's ironic because last night was, I think, the first time I ever saw Joni Ernst stand up and criticize a member of her own party in any serious way. So last night they had votes. They attempted to vote on 61 individual military promotions that Senator Tommy Tuberville has been holding up. And Republicans were bringing forward these nominations, and Joni Ernst was one of them, and Tuberville was blocking all of them. So she was very critical, and I saw a lot of reports about, I'm working on an article, I just hadn't finished it yet this morning. But I would say generally, I mean, she is a very toe the line. I mean, she never votes against the way Republican leadership wants to do. So she is certainly not carving any kind of an independent profile. She is in the Republican leadership in the Senate. I believe she's now currently the fourth most senior ranking Republican. So, I wouldn't say that her legacy certainly, I mean, she doesn't have a legacy of someone hasn't enacted. She doesn't have any major legislation that's associated with her. She did help with the Violence Against Women Act reauthorization, but I mean, that's probably the most significant thing. And that was not, I wouldn't call that a great achievement, especially since they didn't get one of the key things, closing the boyfriend loophole that a lot of gun safety advocates have been advocating for. And that was something that she didn't get over the finish line. So in any case, I mean, but last night, I mean, this was unusual, and a lot of people noticed. Lindsey Graham, Dan Sullivan of Alaska, and Joni Ernst were standing up, and they were very critical of their own colleague for holding up all of these military promotions. And I mean, that was something I haven't seen. She has kind of danced around that issue for the better part of this year and tried to blame Democratic leadership for not getting the individual nominations forward.
Yeah, I'm no fan of Joni Ernst. I don't need to go any further than that. I think she uses her leverage as a woman to harm women. I think she uses her leverage as an ex-military person to harm all of us, perhaps. But that's for another day. I want to get this up on screen because this question takes us really to our first story that I want to get to. It's from the great Mary Knox. She says, I wondered about the caucus by mail. Is there just one candidate, Joe Biden? I read Democrats were expecting a record turnout, but that makes little sense with a single choice. Will independent candidates be included in a Democrat caucus? Well, I guess not if they're true independents. They'd have to. What do you say about that?
Well, I don't really know. I don't know who is predicting that there would be a record turnout. I can't really imagine. I mean, the record turnout at a Democratic caucus was in 2008, and I don't think that anybody, I mean, in theory, I guess if you're voting by mail, there could be more people who participate. But I think given that Joe Biden would be the only candidate, by the way, I have not seen the layout of these. They're not going to be called ballots. They're going to be called presidential preference cards. And so I don't know whether they will actually have just Joe Biden's name on it or whether there'll just be blank and people will be writing someone in. I haven't heard of whether, for instance, Dean Phillips, who is the member of Congress from Minnesota, being the Democratic nomination. I don't know whether his name would also be printed on this presidential preference card or if it's going to be write-in. I think that it's fairly meaningless, this mail-in caucus, because Joe Biden is not being seriously challenged, and it may be more significant in 2028 when, one way or another, it's going to be a wide open race on the Democratic side. But I don't expect the Iowa caucuses to be first. I mean, they're not on the Democratic side. I don't expect them to be first in 2028, and I don't expect them ever to generate the kind of excitement we saw in 2008 or to a lesser extent in 2016 and 2020.
What do you make of that Dean Phillips candidacy? Is that for real? Because I look at this guy and he voted with Joe Biden 100% of the time. He's running supposedly against Joe Biden. It's almost, does he have some kind of a little ghoulish side to this? I mean, is he wanting to position himself in case Biden doesn't make it? I mean, what's that all about?
I can't really figure it. I don't have a good read on it. As far as my impression is that in Minnesota, I mean, everybody in the DFL, that's what they call their state Democratic Party, is against him doing this. So, I mean, I have to believe that maybe he thinks he's positioning himself for 2028. He's going to raise his name ID, but I don't really understand what the angle is here, because even if, something unexpected happened, right? Let's say, I mean, Joe Biden died next year before that. There's no way the Democratic Party is going to nominate Dean Phillips. I mean, that's just not going to happen. I don't know. There are a lot of questions about if for some reason Joe Biden became unable to run. So I don't really see, I mean, this thing, he went down to South Carolina to campaign, and Jim Clyburn had been critical of his candidacy. And Dean Phillips said something like, well, I think Jim Clyburn knows better. I mean, it's like, why would you go? Anyway, he seems not really ready for prime time to me. I saw just a few snippets from a town hall he did in New Hampshire, and he just kind of fumbled on what I thought were very straightforward questions from people. So I don't think this guy, I mean, one thing I did mention on the radio show that Dennis Hart and I do on KHOI radio this week is that you have to remember that anytime there's somebody else on the ballot, there are always some people in a political party who are dissatisfied with whoever the incumbent is.
Well, I am. That's what this Dean Johnson guy, I'm like, give me something, dude. I mean,
Right.
give me a program or a policy that you disagree on. But no, I agree with Biden 100% of the time. I'm younger. Yeah, I know that you're younger, but I mean, why would someone vote for you as opposed to Biden unless he doesn't make it to the finish line? It's weird. Yeah.
I mean, an example I like to give is that when Terry Branstad was running for re-election as governor in 2014, there was this no-hoper who qualified for the ballot on the Republican side. And I think he got like 18% of the vote in the Republican primary. I mean, he spent no money, did nothing. But so there are certain people who will always say, yeah, like I don't like Branstad. It doesn't mean that those people weren't going to, those Republicans anyway, it doesn't mean they weren't going to vote for Branstad in November. It's just a way to register that they're dissatisfied. And a lot of Democrats aren't particularly happy with Joe Biden right now. But I don't think that Dean Phillips has any base constituency of support. I don't really understand, like you said, I don't understand his angle. He doesn't, it's not like he's running with a policy, right? Like Medicaid for all or Medicare for all or whatever it is that he wants to do. He's just like, yeah, it's like, I'm younger than Joe Biden and Joe Biden shouldn't be running. And we'll see. I just don't think, if he's thinking that this is going to help him for the next cycle, I think the next cycle is going to be a battle of Democratic governors. And I mean, there are just going to be a lot of heavyweights in that race in 2028, and nobody's going to be interested in what Dean Phillips has to say.
Well, I want to thank Mary Knox for her question there because it leads us into our first story. But now, square me up on this, that I've got this right. Mary Knox follows this more closely than I do, and I know that Laura Belin does. But the Republicans are going to continue on with their caucus as scheduled, that straw vote, basically, and it's not real meaningful maybe this time around with the Trump doing what he's doing in Iowa. But the Democrats, mail-in caucus, the results of their caucus will be deferred until South Carolina goes first, and then it'll be revealed. Is that how this thing's going to work?
The Iowa Democratic Party is planning to announce the results on March 5th. So that's Super Tuesday. So actually after South Carolina, after the early state window, March 5th, I mean, some people would say it would have been smarter for them to maybe announce it on, I don't know, March 7th or March 8th, because Super Tuesday, there's going to be so much news from all of the other primaries. I don't think anyone's going to really care about what the Democratic Party mail-in results were
from Iowa. It might be decided, right? Isn't that kind of the idea behind the Super
so.
Tuesday?
I mean, the DNC, basically the DNC calendar does not include Iowa in one of the early states. So Iowa, under state law, the Democratic and Republican parties have traditionally held their caucuses on the same night. That's to prevent people from changing their registration and participating in both. So the Iowa Democrats are going to have in-person caucuses on January 15th. At least that's when it's tentatively scheduled. It's going to be party business only. So no presidential preference on the Democratic side. So it's electing people to the platform committee and the central committee for your county and the affirmative action chair and the other things, and passing platform resolutions. Sometimes those come out of the caucuses. On the Republican side, yeah, they haven't changed their calendar. So Iowa's first, then New Hampshire. And so they are going to do their usual presidential straw poll that they always do. And I think that they will have pretty big turnout, because remember that other people can change their registration to Republican and participate in the caucus. So a lot of independents, since there's nothing really happening on the Democratic side this year, they're going to go and register as Republicans and go to that caucus. And I think that with all of the candidates who are participating, and maybe a few will drop out before January 15th, but there will be enough of a well-funded campaign on that side that I think we'll see pretty strong turnout at the Republican caucuses in January.
Okay, let's get going here, because I got a lot of stuff, and Laura's time is precious, and I always run out of time when we're talking. This is from Bleeding Heartland, and this was kind of a head snap. I don't read as well as I used to, folks. I used to be able to read Newswire copy upside down when I was young and sharp. I don't read it as well as I used to. I read this now. What the hell? Anti-Trump messages hit a wall with Iowa Republicans. You got to read that part. I'm like, what? Iowa Republicans have seen more advertising against former President Donald Trump this year than GOP voters anywhere else in the country. Nevertheless, Trump is as well positioned for the 2024 caucuses as ever, according to the latest Iowa poll by Seltzer and Company for the Des Moines Register, NBC News, and Mediacom. Among those likely to attend the GOP caucuses in January, 43% support Trump, and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley are tied for second place at 16%. no other candidate, and including the guy that won in 2016, Ted Cruz. None of those people are even in double digits. A lot of people forget that. Cruz won in 2016 here in Iowa. Yeah, barely. The latest Iowa poll validates the conclusions of research Win It Back PAC conducted this summer. Most ads seeking to drive Republicans away from Trump either have no effect or increase his support from the target audience. Okay, before we go any further, Laura, let's take that up, because I mean, this seems to be a reoccurring theme, and I don't know how to come down on this, because I'm in the business of blabbing, and I talk against Trump a lot and that type of thing, but it seems like it's worse than yelling into a mirror. It seems like the negative things put forward about Trump come back positive for him.
Well, it's extraordinary. And we just haven't seen a political figure like Donald Trump. I mean, think of how many political careers have ended just because somebody was being investigated for crimes, let alone indicted for one crime. And we have someone who's been indicted for 91 state or federal crimes in 4 different jurisdictions. And yet, if anything, it's increased his support with the Republican electorate. And this Win It Back PAC, this memo, the New York Times, Jonathan Swan was the first to report this in September. It was really fascinating because these ads, I don't know if you saw any of the ads. I included some of them in this piece, the ones that actually ran on TV. I thought they were very well produced. They were unscripted and natural. And I thought that the people speaking were very disarming and genuine sounding. But Win It Back PAC tested 40 ads on all kinds of different issues and messages with focus groups. And then they did online experiments, and they found, as I mentioned, I mean, not only did almost none of them were effective at all, and several of them backfired. Like, they would attack Trump on his handling of the COVID pandemic, and not the real things that they should have been saying, but like for them, they say, oh, well, he locked down the country and he listened too much to Dr. Fauci. And this increased his support. And even the ads that included video of Trump actually expressing ideas that Republican voters find objectionable, if anybody else says it, they find a way to make excuses for it if it comes from Trump. So it really is quite an amazing phenomenon. And that's why I say, I mean, you and I are old enough to remember when they called Ronald Reagan the Teflon president, but Trump really is the Teflon president. When it comes to Republicans, I mean, there's nothing that he can do, it seems like, that will bring down his support. And the reason why everyone is focusing on Iowa, these groups that are spending a lot of money, is that Iowa is going first. And they realize that if Trump runs away with it in Iowa, there's just not going to be any path to stopping him in these other states. He has a commanding lead in pretty much every state. So they're staking it all in Iowa, but this new poll that just came out shows, I mean, he is still in a very strong position, and his supporters are the most enthusiastic. They're the most likely to say their minds are made up and they're not open to other alternatives. So I felt like the Des Moines Register write-up was trying to say, well, it's not over and lots of people can still change their minds. But when you really look at it, I mean, the battle is for second place. And my guest author, Dan Guild, who he and I were talking about this earlier in the week, and he still thinks that Nikki Haley could end up finishing second in Iowa rather than Ron DeSantis. And that's kind of the main thing he has his eye on, because Haley is already running second in New Hampshire. And that could make things fairly interesting. But I mean, look, the bulk of Republican voters like Trump. They're happy with Trump. And I think that he could actually do even better at the caucuses than his poll numbers indicate, because I've been watching on C-SPAN, I've been watching his last maybe 5 or 6 Iowa rallies that he's had. And his campaign has a much better organization than they did in 2015. As you mentioned, Ted Cruz won the 2016 caucuses. A lot of people don't remember that. And afterwards, there were some takedowns of the Trump campaign, how their staff, they weren't well organized. They weren't having people sign commitment cards. Well, that is completely different now. They have the speakers who come on stage before Donald Trump. Every one of them reminds people, mark that date on your calendar, sign a card, commit to being a caucus captain, bring 3 friends, 5 friends, 10 friends, make a speech for Trump at your precinct. It's really easy. And so I think that they are going to bring, and actually the Des Moines Register poll showed that there are a lot of first-time caucus goers who like Donald Trump very much. So, I mean, I think that's how Barack Obama won the caucuses in 2008, by inspiring a lot of people who had never attended a caucus before. So I just think it's really hard for me to see. And I was laughing because I published that piece this week. And then yesterday, one of my contacts sent me like yet another mailing from AFP Action that was kind of like the one that the picture you showed on screen. That was just,
Yeah.
are you willing to risk it all on Trump? You can stop Biden by letting go of Trump. I mean, they have sent so many of these. And the Republican voters, frankly, don't believe that Donald Trump would lose to Biden. At least most of them don't believe that. So it's it's not effective, but I guess they have money to burn, right? The AFP is one of the Koch funded groups, so
Yeah.
they can spend a lot of money on direct mail in Iowa. But
Let me see what else I had here from the article itself. Yeah, this is what you were talking about as far as its the backfire effect. And then, like you said, they don't believe this. Most of the ads opposing Trump incorporate one or more of those ideas. Looking at them in turn, Trump can't win the general election. Well, I don't think these people are voting electorally. This is weird with Trump almost. There's a lot of magic thinking going on here. They don't care about this. It doesn't seem like it anyway, Laura.
remember that a lot of them believe that he won the last election.
Yeah, right. Oh, good point.
So many of them believe that Trump's big lie, but many of them, if you look at the register poll findings, even a lot of people who aren't supporting Donald Trump, they think that he can beat Joe Biden. And I think here part of the thing that we may be seeing is that the conservative media have been so focused on Biden allegedly being senile and the gaffes and things that I think a lot of people just think, oh, well, absolutely anybody, any name on the ballot easily beat Joe Biden. And by the way, I think that all of these mailings are overstating the case quite a bit. I mean, I don't know many Democrats right now who are sitting back and saying, oh, there's no way Trump could beat Biden. He would definitely lose to Biden. I mean, I can make that case that Biden is favored in that matchup, especially if you start looking at some of the swing states. But you can't look at the polling today and say Donald Trump has zero chance of beating Joe Biden. That's just not accurate.
All right, let's continue to move through here. So that was for that one. Here is the next snippet. Too much baggage, too many distractions. Unprecedented must be one of the most overused words in the Trump era. God, Trump era. I mean, I don't want to go out in the Trump era. I mean, honest to God, this is not what I got in for, but this is what we're in, folks. But what else can you say about this candidate's upward trend in polls of Republicans, even after being indicted for 91 state or federal crimes in 4 jurisdictions? Okay, now this is the cool thing about Laura Belin, because not only does she follow politics, but she follows the law. She knows the judiciary. She knows all of this stuff. And Laura, it looks to me like if the Trump era is going to end, it's probably not going to happen politically. It's probably going to happen legally. What's your current assessment between now and the general election in November 2024 legally for Donald Trump?
Well, this judge, he got very lucky with a judge who has this documents case in Florida, the classified documents case, because she is slow walking everything down there. So it may well be that case is not resolved before the 2024 general election. I mean, the other case, though, the January 6th case that's in Washington, the federal crimes related to that is scheduled to go to trial in March of 2024. I think there may still be efforts by Trump's lawyers to delay that. But I mean, that one, I think that the evidence is fairly strong. And the Georgia indictments, which are also related to the plot to overturn the election, but with a focus on Georgia, I mean, that may be the one where he's in the most jeopardy, because the prosecutor down there has already flipped. I mean, she's taken plea agreements with several of the other defendants who apparently have now agreed to cooperate with her investigation. So they could end up producing some evidence that's pretty damaging to Donald Trump. But the thing is, like, I mean, it seems like with the Republican electorate, they just discount any of these criminal charges. They discount as politically motivated. And the irony is that, I mean, you can make a really strong case that Hunter Biden is the one who's faced more political. I mean, I've talked to accountants who say no one is ever really charged with a felony for these tax violations that he's charged with. And I'm not saying maybe more people should be charged with them, but for most people, when they committed that kind of a tax crime, allegedly, they would be fined and forced to pay their back taxes, but very few people are actually prosecuted for that. I mean, so that's just the way our tax enforcement goes. So, I mean, I think the DOJ is really like bending over backwards to show that Hunter Biden isn't getting special treatment. And meanwhile, Republicans are claiming that the department is being weaponized against Trump and that the Georgia prosecutor, I mean, it's going to be interesting. I don't expect Donald Trump to ever spend a day in prison. I don't
That's
know.
what I said from the beginning. The people like that don't go to jail, and it goes to the heart of what you're talking about, the difference between white collar crime and blue collar crime. A lot of those crimes are big bucks. I mean, and he screws a lot of people with his hijinks financially, but
Right.
that's not what, you're more likely to go into jail for having a crack pipe in your pants or something in America. I mean, honest to God.
And so particularly since he has lifelong Secret Service protection,
Yeah,
I mean, that's the absolute most, if he's convicted of some of these crimes, house arrest in his luxury resort where he still would have Secret Service protection. I just can't even imagine how that would work. I don't know what kind of a facility he could even be imprisoned in. So I don't know how it's going to end. I do think that depending on how some of these criminal cases play out next year, it could be quite damaging to him with independent voters, and that may not be showing up in the polls right now. So who knows? But a lot can change in a year, and we have no idea what the economy is going to be like. I mean, next fall, we don't know what gas prices are going to be next fall. So all kinds of things can change.
Yeah, and then like I always say, I mean, keep your fingers and toes crossed, but then again, be careful what you wish for, because remember January 7th. I mean, I don't want to go any further into that, but I mean, if he does get convicted, if he would ever end up in handcuffs, I don't know, but I don't want to go to that. But how about this one now? Kind of maybe rank these for us. This is interesting. Trump is in it for himself. Okay. How much of this is what Trump does and says and all that is that he's just not real smart, and he really does think that he's got the right idea? You'd have to be an idiot to believe that, but he's kind of an idiot. How much of it is that? How much of it is the fact that he is in it for himself, for the financial reward? Is that legit? I mean, is he doing this for money? I look at that and I think, probably, yeah, a little bit, but that's not the primary reason that he's in it. And a lot of it is just self-aggrandizement. He's got this weirdo ego thing that he just wants to be famous and be president of the United States and do all this stuff and screw with all of us. Okay, those are kind of three categories. What do you think the three categories rank?
I think, and remember that we're talking about messages that conservative leaning groups are using to try to persuade Republicans. So they're not really going for that Trump is just in it to enrich himself. I mean, frankly, he did while he was president. The Trump organization did make a lot of money, and his children did make a lot of money, but that's not where they're going. They're talking about how he's not really a team player. He attacks other Republicans. And there was a bit of a half-hearted effort this summer to make hay out of the fact that he criticized Governor Kim Reynolds, who is very well liked among Iowa Republicans. But I think what we're seeing is Republicans might like Kim Reynolds, but they just don't care. I mean, that's just the way Trump is, right? He calls people names. He lashes out at people on his social media platform, and that's not a deal breaker. So, I mean, I think where they were trying with the ad that was making that case was that, well, we're a big Republican family, and I don't like it when Trump attacks other Republicans, and he thinks it's just his party, and I don't think that's helpful. Well, it just doesn't seem like a lot of Republicans care about that. And he is also bringing in people. I mean, he has claimed, right, that he's fighting the swamp and the establishment, and that he brought in a lot of working people to the party who didn't consider themselves Republican. And it is true. I mean, it's accurate to say that there are a lot of people who didn't identify with the Republican Party prior to his presidency, but are big Trump fans. And he brought those people. And so I think some of those people are going to be ending up at the caucuses this year. So it's amazing to see. Like we would look at Trump and say, wow, I mean, to say that he has baggage is a huge understatement. And so many things were a disaster during his presidency, but then like people are ready to sign up for that again. Also, I thought it was very interesting. And this was in the Win It Back PAC memo, and this was an ad that they didn't use, but they tested an ad where he had said, you may remember a few weeks ago, he made comments trying to say that Republicans don't know how to talk about abortion and these 6-week bans are terrible. He just thought it was terrible, the law that Ron DeSantis signed, and that Republicans are that's why they lost the midterms, was on abortion. And so for a lot of social conservatives, they were, at least they were claiming to be upset by that because they support these abortion bans. Well, the Trump campaign just rolled out like 100 faith leader endorsements over the weekend. And these are people who believe in banning abortion, but they just don't hold that against Trump, that what he said. And so Win It Back PAC didn't even try to run ads on that message about abortion. It just doesn't work with their audiences. People will just write it off.
Okay. A lot of these Republicans that are opposing Trump strike me as being Rockefeller Republicans, Eisenhower Republicans. And I just want to tell those people, I don't know what you're thinking, but your party got on the crazy train and headed off over the horizon years ago, and it ain't ever coming back. Then I look at some of these first-time caucus goers that you talked about, maybe some young people that are getting in the Republican Party, and they remind me of the George Wallace voters of my youth. They're extremely dissatisfied with the way things are, and they want to get the biggest bomb thrower they can get as far as politics and the status quo are concerned. And they're used to look at George Wallace as an example, but they're looking at Donald Trump in the same vein. But this kind of goes back to how we started, Laura. Be careful of what you're wishing for here, because it could all go sideways. And I got a lot of questions coming in here. I want to get to these for Laura. This is from Holly, great friend of Podcast by George. She says, have independents been polled yet? And if so, where do they stand now regarding voting for Trump? The independents. Now, when I think maybe this gets into Bobby Kennedy territory even. What do you think?
I have not seen any recent polls just of independents in Iowa. I mean, in the national polls, independents broadly don't like Donald Trump or Joe Biden. So a number that I've been looking at closely in a lot of national polls is, what do the voters say who don't like either of the major party options, and where are they leaning? Because that's how Donald Trump won the presidency, frankly. The people who didn't like Trump or Hillary Clinton, those voters toward the end broke for Trump, and that's how he won. But in 2020, the voters who didn't like either of the candidates broke for Biden. So I don't think there's been enough good polling on that to say where independents stand. But certainly one thing I do know about independent voters is that they don't support banning abortion. So I think whatever happens next year, you're going to see Democratic candidates up and down the ballot in every state talking about abortion as much as they can, because they know that the Republican stand on that issue is very toxic with independents.
Yeah, and Mary Knox is, and again, she's kind of like she's psychic, because this is kind of where our show is going if we can get there. A little while ago, she said, Trump said he thought the 15-week abortion ban is a mistake. A lot of people went, oh, that was a head snap. Even that did not make him lose support. What an irony. And this goes into this mystical, magical thing where I don't know what it is with Donald Trump, but you would think that it would, but it didn't, Laura.
He really has a hold on people. I mean, he says he makes gaffes that would end another person's campaign, and it just washes over. I mean, he was just at his last rally that he did in Sioux City. He said multiple times that he was in Sioux Falls. And I mean, if Joe Biden did that, it would just be wall to wall on Fox News, like what, he doesn't even know where he is. He's so confused. I mean, look, it's an easy mistake to make, right? When you're not that familiar with the Midwest. But the point being that people don't even notice. I mean, he said he confused in one of his recent rallies, he confused Turkey with Hungary. He was talking about Viktor Orban and said he's a great leader of Turkey. No, he's the proto-fascist leader of Hungary. But again, I mean, people don't hold Trump to the same standard, and he does have a grip on people. It's quite remarkable to think about. I mean, the 2020 election, it wasn't really that close. It was close in some states, but like Mitt Romney, his election against Barack Obama, that was actually a closer election than Trump's against Joe Biden. I mean, it was a pretty narrow loss. And yet people weren't saying that, Mitt Romney was cheated and he really should have won. And they kind of, usually with the Republican Party in the past, when they've had a candidate who didn't win, they've tried to distance themselves, like from Poppy Bush. But with Trump, I mean, they embrace him. And that's, some of these ads have been trying to get at that. Like with Trump, they lost the House, they lost the presidency, they lost the Senate. And yet people don't hold him responsible for that. And I think that's part of the reason why Trump has made these comments on abortion, is that he's looking for another explanation for why this red wave didn't materialize in most of the country, Iowa and Florida being the exceptions. It didn't materialize. And one obvious thing is that the Republicans were still dealing with a lot of Trump baggage. But he's saying, well, no, it was actually abortion and the Supreme Court's Dobbs decision. And you can make an argument that there's data to support that.
Yeah, and I kind of kicked myself in the ass here for talking about Trump. People know I don't talk about him very often on my show, and I criticize mainstream media, MSNBC and CNN and stuff, for carrying water for this guy, basically, free advertising, billions of dollars worth. And here we are talking about him, but I mean, it's legit. It's happening. Laura talked a couple of times about the rally in Sioux City. Trump didn't seem, he could confused it with Sioux Falls. I remember when Jackson Brown appeared at the Des Moines Civic Center and he said, it's great to be in Davenport. So like Laura says, I mean, that can happen when you travel around all of these places and that type of thing. That's not a big thing, but I've got a couple of clips here from the Good Liars. People are familiar with this. And this first one is from an Iowa rally. And this goes back to the promotion for the show. I mean, is it funny? Is it funny? Ha. Is it funny weird? Or is it funny fatal? What we're screwing with here. Watch this, folks.
So what is that?
That's best president of the United States.
All right, that's Donald Trump with his mugshot, right? It says never surrender.
Never surrender.
Okay, that is a picture of him surrendering to Georgia authorities, though, right?
Sure. He's the best president of America.
Okay, but that literally is a picture of him surrendering, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
I mean, it is extraordinary. I regret that my children grew up in this time when it's normal. The Trumpism is the normal way Republicans are. And by the way, you mentioned, I don't write very much about Trump either. Generally, I haven't done a lot of Iowa caucus campaign coverage because so many reporters are covering the presidential candidates every day. So I've tended to write about it only when there was a major event, like a cattle call where 15 candidates were there, or after one of the televised debates. But I did want to write about this poll and this advertising campaign I've been thinking about for a while, because my contacts have been sending me examples of this direct mail. So, but I agree with you. I mean, I just generally don't write very often about Donald Trump either, but it is a striking phenomenon. And I should point out, I don't know if I mentioned this up at the top, his numbers in Iowa are lower than his numbers nationally. So like you could argue that maybe all of this advertising has had some effect, and that's why he's at 43% among Iowa Republicans instead of being at 53%.
You know, I don't want to criticize. There's a lot of different ways to look at this. I follow Matt Taibbi very carefully. He follows politics. He covers the media and their coverage of politics. And his book is behind me a lot of times. I follow him very closely. I look at this deal with Trump and that guy that was just in that last film clip, that Trump supporter. Can Democrats be criticized at all, Laura, for abandoning people like that? And I look at it and I say, well, yeah, maybe they abandoned him. But I also look at that guy. I know that guy. I mean, I grew up around people like that. Those people didn't subscribe to the newspaper. They didn't watch the news. When I was a kid, they weren't engaged. They sure as hell weren't at a political rally. Now they are. I think the media and the internet has something to do with that. But again, do you hold the Democrats accountable somewhat for not somehow embracing those people? Because that is the core to me. That looks like the base of the Trump phenomenon.
Well, we could do a whole show on that.
Yeah.
I have a lot of thoughts about where the Democrats went wrong. I mean, first of all, the Democrats have been losing ground with white voters who don't have a college degree for a long time. It's been going on for at least 10 or 15 years. And Trump really accelerated that trend. And that is a group he's extremely strong with, white voters without a college degree. He's done his performance among white voters with a college degree, who used to be a really strong Republican voting bloc, has just tanked. And that's why so many suburban areas have turned blue around the country. Again, and this isn't just exclusive to Iowa. I mean, when people say, you know, Democrats stop talking to those people, I guess I challenge that assumption, because there's a whole right-wing ecosphere. I mean, it dominates talk radio everywhere. There's Fox News, there's Newsmax, and people are getting those messages 365 days a year. And I think it's really difficult for Democratic candidates who don't have media outlets hyping them all the time. It's really hard to compete with. And I know, because I follow the Iowa legislative races closely, that we've had Iowa legislators and legislative candidates who were talking to people like that. They were deeply rooted in the community. They were serving the community. They were knocking on thousands of doors. They were going to every pancake breakfast and spaghetti supper. And yet, right, the voting trend has been very strongly against the Democratic candidates up and down the ballot. And I mean, I've talked to Democrats who are running for like county offices, and they're out there trying to campaign, and people are saying to them, why are you trying to defund the police? Which obviously wasn't part of their platform, but it's something that they heard on talk radio
ad nauseum. Yeah. Over and over and over.
I mean, it's a really complicated question. Trump has struck a chord with those voters who already, I mean, this is why Bruce Braley lost to Joni Ernst in 2014. It was the white voters without a college degree that he lost. So, and I mean, going back to the Tea Party movement in 2010, so before Donald Trump was even a candidate. So this is a group Republicans have been gaining ground with for a long time, but Trump has really tapped into it, and it is difficult. I mean, they've shown, there's been research, when somebody believes in a conspiracy theory and you present them with facts that disprove their theory, they just become more convinced in their belief. That doesn't, it's a very difficult thing to combat. But I mean, I think the answer is going to be it's going to be mobilizing more voters. And so that's why I think with a lot of Democrats, people are most worried about just low Democratic turnout rather than Democrats, crossing over to vote for Trump, because people who like Trump, I mean, they already like Trump, right? He's not winning over a lot of new people through persuasion, but he does mobilize a lot of people who are enthusiastic. And there are a lot of people who have never attended a political rally before in their life, but they go to these Trump rallies.
Yeah, one more clip here, very short. Again, from the Good Liars. Check them out on YouTube. But this is exactly what Laura is talking about. The more you criticize Trump, the better he does. The more you present facts, the more they're unconvinced and come back. Watch this.
Which do you think are more dangerous, drag shows or guns to children?
Drag shows.
Drag shows. How many people do you think have been killed at a drag show?
I don't know, but the long-term effects are detrimental.
How many people do you think die every year from guns?
I have no idea.
48,000.
48,000?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, there's probably 100,000 die from drag shows.
Mm-hmm.
See, that's what he's going to go away with. That 100,000. Yeah.
The drag show is a good example of just something that was completely manufactured by media, right? I mean, drag shows have been around for decades, and yet it was not an issue that was at the forefront of anybody's mind. And then suddenly it becomes something that we're all worried, whether it's the caravan coming over the southern border or bathrooms in schools or whatever. Drag shows, it's just a hype. It's manufactured crisis or moral panic, some people call it. And it doesn't, there's no basis in reality, right? But you're not going to persuade somebody like that person who he was talking with.
Yeah. All right. We got to flash through some things here. We're going to do some quick hitters. This goes to the heart of what we talked about earlier. These are the actual percentages of Iowa Republicans thinking Trump can beat Biden regardless of his legal challenges. 65% to 32% think that that's going to be a problem or an issue. Mm-hmm. So we don't need to talk about that. We talked about that already. This is to go back to what Mary Knox was kind of leading us to here. This again is from Bleeding Heartland. Tell us what we're looking at here, Laura.
So there were some new data released recently. The Des Moines Register was the first to report on it, that showed what's been going on with Iowa's family planning program. So this is a program that provides services, including contraception, STI testing, and a few other services that are, this was something for people who made too much money to qualify for Medicaid. And it was a program that Planned Parenthood used to be the primary provider in this program. And when the Republicans in the first year of their trifecta in 2017, they changed everything so that Planned Parenthood could no longer be part of this program. And so new data came out just to show how enormous the collapse has been in family planning services. And so I went back, the Des Moines Register reported on some of the new data, but I went back to the legislative debates from 2017 to show what Republicans were saying. Which anybody who knew anything about family planning could have told them that it wasn't going to work out this way. But they were claiming, we're going to have this new program. It's going to have even more providers. It's going to give women more access all over the state. And in fact, it's just been a total collapse of fewer than, I mean, by more than 90% in terms of the providers are very few providers are involved anymore. Very few people are getting services anymore through this program. And so it, of course, as we knew, it did not increase access to services. And although it's very difficult to prove causation, Iowa did see an increase in the abortion rate and an increase in some sexually transmitted infections after they kicked Planned Parenthood out of the
Gonorrhea, yeah.
it's really not that surprising, especially since, like, when you looked at the data already in 2017, when I was covering this, we had data from Texas because Texas had defunded Planned Parenthood from their state's family planning programs earlier. And we could see, I mean, in Texas, it was increase in unplanned pregnancies, increase in maternal mortality, infant mortality, STIs, and yet they went ahead and did it anyway. So that post just laid out with some receipts from what they were saying, the promises they made, and how it's actually worked out.
Okay, so what they were saying wasn't true. Let's go to the casino here. Let's go to that great line that I use all the time. Were they too dumb or were they in on it? What say ye on that, Laura? Now, this goes kind of to the Trump question we were talking about earlier. You talked about in 2017. Did they know? Did you know? Were they too dumb or they did know and they were lying?
I mean, people were telling them during the legislative hearings on this bill, people who work in the field were telling them that this would result in fewer people getting care. So I got some pushback from readers who said, why did you say in your headline that they were wrong instead of saying they lied? It's hard for me. I don't have evidence that they knew that they were lying, right? I mean, I think that some of them maybe never believed what they were saying, but some of them perhaps believed it, right? There are some people who truly believe Trump won the 2020 election, even though that's completely untrue. So I don't know. If I am ever able to find evidence that some of these people knew that this was not going to be the impact of it, then I'll be very happy to say, I'm not afraid to say a politician lied, but right now, like, I don't have any evidence about their state of mind. They certainly should have known. And perhaps it wouldn't surprise me if some of them did know that this was not true. And they were just pandering to their anti-abortion base that doesn't like Planned Parenthood, when, of course, the other thing that I thought was funny, I didn't get into in that post, but during the legislative debate, she said, Planned Parenthood can still do their sex education. Well, 2 years later, they came back and they barred Planned Parenthood from the sex education grants. So again, that's something that is only going to result in increased teen pregnancies and more likely than not, more abortions.
All right, we're running out of time here, and I got a question. That's Victor Tiffany. He's been on my show before. He's a great guy. He's out in the northeastern part of the United States. He has his own show. I mean, he's kind of throwing a bomb into this. But I hate to put Laura on the spot. Laura, she's been a lifelong Democrat. Hell, I have been.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm telling you something. I got some second thoughts here moving ahead, and so does Victor. He's asking you the question, Laura. As bad as Trump is, he's not as dangerous as the addled World War III monger Biden. Now, this, again, this is a bit of a flamethrower here, but this is going to be an issue. What do you think?
I just completely disagree. Biden was not my first, second, third, or fifth choice in the 2020 caucuses. I actually caucused for Elizabeth Warren. But in any case, I'm not, you name your issue, right? From reproductive rights alone to the judges who are being appointed. I absolutely think that Biden is way better than Trump on any number of issues. So I guess I just reject a false equivalency like that. And I know, I'm guessing that he may be referring to the situation in the Middle East right now, which is probably an area where Trump and Biden have a lot less difference in their policy. Although what I've been reading is that Biden, while overtly supporting the Israeli government, has been behind the scenes trying to restrain the Israeli government. And I just don't know. It's not my area of expertise, but I would say that in some foreign policy issues, but then when you look at Ukraine, they're completely different, right? Trump is basically, I thought that he was a stooge for the Russian president, and I don't think that he would. I don't think that he would pursue anything. I think he's basically said he wants to pull the United States out of NATO. Your Victor might think that that's a good idea. I don't. But in any case, on the domestic policy side, whether it's guns, feeding kids, whatever it is, education funding, appointing judges, LGBTQ rights. There's just absolutely no comparison between Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And I'm
Thanks,
not a big
Victor.
fan of
Victor
Biden.
got this. I'm going to blame this on Victor because I don't want to go out on this. I want to go out on this, and we got time to get it up on screen because this is from the great Chris Gloninger. Now, people know who he is. He's the local weatherman that left the state basically because his life was being threatened. He was concerned and worried about the safety of his family, but also he was kind of disgusted with us, and he's gotten out east now.
Yeah.
And here's his post. Follow this guy on Twitter, folks. Chris Gloninger. He says, Iowa, imagine if Kim Reynolds actually had this passion about real issues. And he's talking about here in Iowa, we've got sky-high cancer levels. We got a climate crisis that, these CAFOs and this animal agriculture is contributing mightily to. It's responsible for the bad water and on and on. Instead, Chris says, Reynolds plays sheriff at the border, controls school curriculums, and tells women what they can't and can do with their bodies. Let me play this clip, and I'll come right back here after this. Watch this, folks.
They deserve the tools to help these kids succeed, not a damn distraction on a nasty, pornographic book that should never, ever be in a classroom. And I think it's pretty clear. And if they can't distinguish that, then, I don't know. Maybe we ought to take a look at what they should be dealing with. So it's just a distraction.
Yeah, the education, again, we could do a whole show on everything, everything that's wrong with Kim Reynolds' education agenda. But I should just say that the handful of books that the Republicans were targeting with this bill, I would have no concerns about my teenagers reading those books. They were largely books by marginalized authors from the LGBTQ community or people of color. And what they say is pornographic. It really doesn't meet the legal standard for pornography at all. These are by and large award-winning books. Okay. Books about, and many of them do reference difficult experiences, but that is not the same as pornography. So I just couldn't disagree more. But yeah, we didn't really have time to get into the stunt of sending the troops to the border. But look, she's not investing a lot in drug treatment. We have money sitting in the opioid settlement fund that's not even being used for anything right now. And yet then she used federal funds from the American Rescue Plan to send the Iowa National Guard and state troopers down to the southern border. It really is. She's using it to make a political point, right? Every state is a border state, and the Biden administration is failing to secure the southern border. But this isn't a real solution. I do expect her to do it again next summer, though, because she hardly ever has a press conference, but she did have a press conference to talk about that.
Are you in those yet?
The governor did stop barring me from the press conferences. Okay. Unfortunately, the one that she just had last week, they announced it only the day before, and I already had an appointment scheduled for that time. So I was not able to make it. But the governor actually does not bar her team. They don't let me ask a question, but they do allow me to attend the press conferences now. So.
Well, and of course, people know about my opinion on Reynolds, and they know that I can be a hard ass, a sour ass, a curmudgeon, and that type of thing. I look at Kim Reynolds, and I kind of put it in this context. Now, at best, I call her the Kingfisher, and I've explained that on my show before. At other times, I call her an alligator wrestler, a lot of names and that type of thing. But I'll say this maybe as a nice way of how I look at Kim Reynolds. I look at that film clip. I'm not a savant. I'm not a seer of things. She doesn't look quite right to me. I don't know how else to put it. I think of my mother, rest in peace. My mother would say, George, don't pick on people like that. She's afflicted. That's what my mother would say. Now, maybe that's a little bit too harsh, but she certainly doesn't agree with how I look at the world, how I think, and how the people that I look up to, my leaders that I want to walk and talk and to lead, basically. So that's my thing on Kim Reynolds.
I think what Chris Gloninger was getting at is she doesn't listen to the people with real expertise. She takes her cue on all this education policy stuff. She's taking her cue from Moms for Liberty and other people who are in a panic, like the people who are so upset about drag shows, right?
Yes.
So upset. This don't say gay trans law. This is completely absurd. And one of the Democrats in the Iowa House, Sharon Steckman, pointed this out when they were debating the education bill that says you can't have any instruction about sexual orientation or gender identity from K through 6. But meanwhile, they passed the bathroom bill as well. So she said she's a retired fifth grade teacher. So she said, how am I supposed to explain to my fifth graders that this child has to use a different bathroom when you've just told me I can't have any instruction on gender identity, right? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And the vagueness in the law, I mean, there are a lot of questions about how to interpret that. There are lots of books that have an LGBTQ character or discuss LGBTQ themes that don't have any depictions of a sex act. And many people are wondering whether those books are now banned in elementary school
Let
libraries.
me ask you about the books because I don't see this in the reporting of the coverage very often. How I went to school, I'm thinking these are books that are in the library that a particular student might check out and read, but it's portrayed as if teachers are standing up in front of a school assembly and teaching chapter and verse out of these books that are in question, which obviously is not the case. Have I got that right or not?
Most of the challenged books, right? So genderqueer, All Boys Aren't Blue, I mean, most of the books that are the focus of these challenges were never required in any class. They were in the library for students to check out. But there are books, I mean, the way they wrote that law, it says only age-appropriate materials can be in classrooms and school libraries, and age-appropriate does not include anything that has a description or a visual depiction of a sex act. Period. Okay. So there are a lot of books, right? I mean, we're talking about 1984, To Kill a Mockingbird. There are a lot of books that have a description of a sex act. It's not graphic, it's not pornography, but so now that's why a lot of the school districts are trying to get guidance from the state on how many of these books really need to be removed from the library, because I know that that wasn't the main reason why they were targeting, but that is the result when you have an extremely vaguely written law. And as I mentioned, because it says that there can't be any instruction on sexual orientation or gender identity, there are books for children that talk about different kinds of families, and some families have two moms or two dads. Is that banned now because it could be deemed as having instruction about sexual orientation? I mean, I don't know. The Department of Education hasn't said, and yet educators and school administrators can be disciplined if they're in violation. So I think that's why people have raised reasonable questions. And when Governor Reynolds gets defensive like that, I feel like it's because she can't really engage with the issue at hand. And the people who were advising her on this, again, this was like a Moms for Liberty type of bill. And it included a lot of things that nobody here was asking for. I mean, they removed HPV and the vaccine that prevents HPV from the mandatory sex ed curriculum. And that is only going to increase the number of teenagers who don't get the HPV vaccine and end up possibly decades later getting some kind of preventable cancer. You know, it's like, why would you do that? Nobody was, again, she didn't consult with the cancer experts on it. It was just something that Moms for Liberty activists were looking for. And then it ended up in her bill. And then the Republican legislature basically rubber stamped it. So it was a really dire session for public education, as many others have pointed out. But you know, for her to get defensive about that, I feel that she can't
wave her arms around. We're out of time.
This is reality. I mean, a lot of books that you wouldn't consider pornographic have descriptions of a sex act in them.
Well, and the point of it is, and I'll leave it here because we're out of time, but I tell people those books that she wants to ban, that's a big issue, a big, huge political issue and that type of thing. But then kids can go home, sit around the television with their family and a bowl of popcorn and watch the Terminator movie made in the 80s where somebody gets a steel rod stuck through their head, you know, or watch any number of movies with gory crimes and all kinds of stuff.
They can get pornography.
Yeah, hell yes, on their phones. Yeah,
I mean, teenagers are exposed to much more.
Yeah, get real. Yeah,
it really is. It's laughable. I mean, a lot of librarians said, I wish that there were more kids checking books out of the library.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, kids reading books, period, is not our problem. It's the reverse. All right, I'm going to put some of these web addresses up on screen. I'm going to give you the last word here. Laura, take us out because we're over time, but I always like to give you the last word.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'm going tomorrow to the Summit on Justice and Disparities. Hope to get some more details about racial disparities in Iowa's criminal justice system and efforts to combat that. And so you can find my work at www.bleedingheartland.com. I'm also on several social media platforms at Laura R. Belin. That's my handle on Twitter, Blue Sky, Post, Mastodon. And there is a Bleeding Heartland Facebook page as well.
Okay, great. And of course, I want to make sure that people listen to KHOI Community
thank
Radio
you.
because you can get that on the web because that's great. It's really good because Laura's a pro at this stuff. And then Dennis Hart, the broadcast, he's a pro broadcaster. So, I mean, this is a really nicely
Yes.
presented, energetic, good show. Yeah. And it just,
KHYFM.org. Yes, it's really great working with Dennis, and we appreciate it. It's basically like a 30-minute Iowa politics podcast, is what it should
yeah. And I mean, it just flies by. Okay, Laura, we'll talk again soon. Thanks again for coming
Okay,
on this
thank
edition of
you.
the Live Line. Yeah, folks.
Great.
And I want to
Appreciate
tell
it.
everybody here as we wrap up that if you like seeing Laura Belin in all of those places, and then if you like seeing her with me, particularly for an hour like this, go to podcastbygeorge.com and sign up for the video live streams, the video podcasts on Facebook and YouTube. Easily done there. And then you can also sign up on Twitter or Spotify or Apple Podcasts is a very popular place to get the audio only versions of Podcast by George. And that'll be up with Laura here probably within the hour or so. But that's going to do it, folks. That is going to wrap it up. That's all there is. And there ain't no more. That's another podcast by George.